Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty specific, but honestly really crucial for the future of medicine. We're talking about training medical AI models using virtual patients generated by computers. Now, if you're following AI at all, you know these models are aimed at big things, diagnostics, drug discovery, predicting risks, but they need data, lots of it. They're incredibly data hungry, and the better you want the AI to be, the more data it needs, massive amounts, high quality, diverse data. But here's the kicker, the huge roadblock, accessing and sharing real patient data. It's, well, our sources call it an insurmountable task sometimes. It's a total minefield, logistically, ethically, legally.
That really is the heart of it, what people call the data bottleneck. We have these vital regulations, HIPAA in the US, GDPR in Europe, absolutely critical for protecting patient privacy. We need them. But the unintended consequence is that these essential protections lock data away. It stays stuck in institutional silos. Sharing it across borders, almost impossible. Getting access means complex de-identification, months waiting for ethical review boards, endless regulatory hoops.
Right, so it's this weird paradox. The very rules we need to protect people are kind of holding back the development of AI that could actually save lives. It's like good versus good.
Exactly, and that's where this really ingenious solution comes in. Our sources frame it as almost an ethical requirement now. Computationally generated virtual patients. Think of them as statistically perfect copies of real patient groups, but they're completely artificial. No real person's data is in there.
Okay, so our goal today for you listening is to unpack how these virtual patients get around that bottleneck, how they help build AI that's not just smarter and faster, but also safer and, crucially, fairer, all without compromising that essential privacy.
Yeah, let's dig into the details.
Okay, so before we jump to the solution, let's really understand the problem. Why is relying only on real patient data so difficult for developing good AI?
Well, like we touched on, the first big one is just the sheer cost and hassle of privacy and compliance. Even after data is supposedly de-identified, there's always this lingering risk it could be re-identified somehow. So the legal and ethical weight never really goes away. That massively slows down innovation. The tech moves fast, but the data access crawls.
And even if you manage to get the data, it often comes with its own set of problems, right? Like not being representative enough, the whole scarcity issue. Real-world data sets often carry the marks of history, maybe biases, and who got access to care, where studies were done, historical inequities baked right in.
Absolutely. So if your AI learns mostly from, say, records from one big city hospital, how well is it really going to work in a rural clinic with a totally different population?
Probably not very well. It won't generalize.
Exactly. And think about what's missing from that data, too. You often lack enough examples of the really crucial stuff. Rare diseases, specific side effects from drugs that only show up occasionally, or certain demographics like the very young or very old. The AI just can't learn reliably from, 2 or 3 examples. These gaps create models that are brittle, potentially biased, and frankly not safe enough for wide deployment.
Okay, so privacy hurdles, biased or incomplete data.
Okay.
What else? You mentioned messiness.
Oh yeah, the operational nightmare of data silos and messiness. Patient info is scattered everywhere in countless different electronic health record systems worldwide. Trying to piece together a complete picture for thousands of patients needed for one good model, it's a massive, massive job. And even when you get it, real data is messy. It's got gaps, typos, people using different terms for the same thing. One hospital uses HTN for hypertension, another writes out the full word.
The AI gets confused.
Right. Unless a clinical expert spends ages manually cleaning it all up, standardizing terms, maybe labeling images pixel by pixel, that takes huge amounts of time and money.
Okay, so privacy, scarcity, silos, messiness, a quadruple whammy slowing things down. Now let's talk about the breakthrough. Synthetic patient data. What is it exactly?
So at its core, synthetic data is data generated by a computer algorithm. It's designed to perfectly mirror the statistical patterns or relationships you'd find in real patient data. But crucially, it's entirely new, completely artificial. No real individuals are represented.
I get the privacy angle, but how is this different from just, fudging the numbers a bit on a spreadsheet?
Well, that touches on the early attempts, sort of basic statistical methods. You might look at the age range in real data and just randomly pick ages within that range for your synthetic patients. But that misses the connections, the complex relationships between different factors. The real game changer where it gets really interesting is generative AI. We're talking sophisticated stuff now, like generative adversarial networks, GANs, or variational autoencoders, VAEs, and even newer things like diffusion models.
Okay, GANs, VAEs. Can you break down how they work? How do they create something realistic without just copying.
Sure. Think of a Jan like a duel between two AIs. You've got a generator that's like an art forger trying to create a fake masterpiece, in this case, a fake patient record. Then you have a discriminator that's the detective.
Okay.
The discriminator looks at a mix of real records and the generator's fake ones. And its job is to tell which is which, fake or real.
So they're constantly trying to outsmart each other.
Precisely. They go back and forth thousands, millions of times. The generator gets better and better at making fakes that fool the discriminator, and the discriminator gets better at spotting fakes. Through this process, the generator doesn't just learn simple things like average blood pressure. It learns the deep underlying structure of the data. It learns how combinations of things like age, smoking history, certain enzyme levels correlate with specific outcomes. Once it learns these rules, it becomes like a data factory. It can churn out completely new fictional patient records that follow all the learned patterns but aren't tied to any real person.
And it's not just numbers in a table, right? These models can create other types of data.
Oh, absolutely. Modern generative models can produce incredibly realistic synthetic medical images. Think X-rays, MRIs. They can generate streams of vital signs that look real over time, or even write plausible-sounding synthetic clinical notes.
Wow, okay. And the key benefit then is?
The built-in privacy. Because it's artificial, this data can be shared much more freely. Researchers across different institutions, even different countries, can potentially access and use it without the intense regulatory hurdles and ethical reviews needed for real patient data. It unlocks collaboration.
Okay, so privacy is a huge win, but you also said this helps make the AI smarter and more robust. How does that work?
Well, we talked about those gaps in real data, like for rare diseases. Augmenting scarce data is a big one. If you only have, say, 5 real examples of a rare type of tumor, the AI can't learn much.
Right.
But with synthetic data, you can tell the data factory model, okay, generate me 500 realistic examples that look just like those rare cases. Now the AI has enough material to actually learn the patterns effectively.
That's a critical point. It fills the gaps. And this ability to generate data on demand leads to accelerated development and iteration. Developers don't have to wait potentially months for approval to access real data just to test a new idea. They can, in theory, download a high-quality synthetic data set almost immediately and start prototyping, tweaking their models, iterating much, much faster.
So it really shortens that cycle from idea to actually testing something.
Definitely. And it changes how training itself happens. There's this idea of pre-training and transfer learning. You can take a huge synthetic data set, which is easier to get, and use it for the initial, very computationally heavy training phase. Teach the AI the general rules of medicine, so to speak. Then you take that pre-trained model and fine-tune it using a much smaller, carefully selected set of real patient data, maybe from the specific hospital where it will be used. This hybrid approach often leads to better performance, especially when real data is limited.
That makes sense. And you mentioned safety too. How does synthetic data help there? I think you called it stress testing. Yeah, this is really cool. It's about proactively finding weaknesses. Developers can intentionally create synthetic patient records with weird anomalies or specific edge cases, things that might rarely happen in reality but could potentially break the AI. Like what kind of things?
Well, imagine programming a synthetic vital signs stream, where, say, the heart rate jumps exactly 15 points, but only during the 3rd hour of monitoring and only if the patient also has low potassium.
Yeah.
You create these very specific challenging scenarios. You then feed these stress tests to the AI model. If it fails to detect the anomaly or makes a wrong prediction, you know you have a vulnerability you need to fix. You found it safely using fake data before the AI ever interacts with a real patient. Okay, efficiency and safety are great. But for me, the most powerful aspect, maybe the most ethically important strength of synthetic data, is its potential to help us build fairer AI. It gives us a tool to actively fight against historical biases in healthcare data.
Right, because we said real data often reflects past inequities. If a group was historically excluded from trials or underdiagnosed for something,
then the AI trained purely on that data will inherit that bias. It learns the skewed reality represented in the data, and that leads to real-world harm, AI tools that work less effectively, or even make wrong diagnoses for certain groups of people.
So how does synthetic data fix that?
Through what we call controlled data generation. Developers can analyze the real data, spot the underrepresentation, maybe there's not enough data for a specific ethnic group or for women in a certain age bracket. Then they instruct the generative model to specifically create more synthetic examples for those underrepresented groups. You essentially engineer a balanced data set for training.
So you're not just passively accepting the bias history in the data, you're actively correcting for it in the training material.
Exactly. That's the power. Take the example of AI for diagnosing skin conditions from images. Historically, many data sets used for training are overwhelmingly composed of images from people with lighter skin tones.
A well-known problem.
A huge problem. It means the resulting AI is often much less accurate, sometimes dangerously inaccurate, for people with darker skin tones. With synthetic data, we can tell the model, generate thousands of high-fidelity, realistic skin lesion images across all skin tones, focusing particularly on the ones missing from the real data, in situ. You train the AI on this synthetically balanced set. You aim for equitable training right from the start.
And you can use this for testing fairness too, right? Not just training.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
You can create bespoke synthetic test sets. Imagine creating two sets of virtual patients that are identical in every clinical respect, except one set represents one demographic group, say based on age or ethnicity, and the second set represents another.
You then run your trained AI on both sets. If it performs significantly worse on one set than the other, you know you have a bias problem. You've isolated the issue in a controlled way using synthetic data, so you can diagnose and fix it before deployment. It takes the guesswork out of fairness testing.
This all sounds incredibly promising, almost revolutionary, but can't be perfect, right? What are the catches? What are the challenges we need to be aware of for responsible adoption?
No, you're right. It's not magic. There are definitely challenges. The biggest technical one is probably fidelity and utility. Simply put, the synthetic data has to be good enough. If the generative model fails to capture some really subtle, complex relationships that exist in the real data, or worse, if it accidentally amplifies a hidden bias from the source data.
Then the AI trained on it could learn the wrong things, or even learn flawed patterns.
Exactly. It could lead to misleading results. Which brings up a really tricky point. How do we make sure the synthetic data generation didn't just perfectly replicate the bias we were trying to fix?
Which means validation becomes absolutely critical. We need rigorous validation. We need standardized ways agreed upon across the industry to measure the quality and faithfulness of the synthetic data itself. And then crucially, we need to prove that the models trained using this synthetic data perform just as well, or hopefully even better, when tested on completely separate, real-world patient data. That's the ultimate proof, isn't it?
That's the acid test, absolutely. Beyond the technical, there's public trust and understanding. We need to be really transparent about this. Clinicians, regulators, patients, the public figure us, they need to understand how this data is made, what it's used for, and the safeguards in place. It's not about cutting corners. It's about enabling progress safely and ethically.
Yeah, communication is key. And I guess this also points towards needing updated rules. Regulatory frameworks need to catch up.
For sure. As synthetic data becomes more common, we'll need clear guidelines from regulatory bodies on how it should be generated, how its quality should be validated, and how it can be acceptably used in developing and approving medical AI. We need guardrails to prevent a sort of Wild West situation. Hashtag outro. So, wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for you, the listener? We're really at this fascinating intersection. Synthetic patient data offers this incredible dual advantage. It helps solve the massive data access problem, speeding up innovation, and maybe even more importantly, it gives us a practical tool to actively address and correct historical unfairness baked into our medical data. It lets us be intentional about building equitable AI.
It really is an inspiring vision, a future where potentially life-saving AI tools might get developed and deployed faster, maybe years sooner, and where we have greater confidence that they've been rigorously tested to work well and fairly for everyone, regardless of their background. It points towards faster, safer, and fairer AI.
And perhaps that leaves us with a final thought to consider, something maybe a bit provocative. Given that we now have tools like synthetic data that allow us to audit for bias and intentionally build fairer AI, what's the moral obligation? Do developers now have a responsibility to never release a medical AI model unless it has undergone this kind of synthetic bias audit and correction? Something to think about.